Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation, A Stellar 2013 and 5 Things to Watch For in 2014. I'm Margaret Speich, Senior Vice President of Industry Communications at the U.S. Dairy Export Council, and in this presentation, I'm going to review the highlights of this year's U.S. dairy export performance and talk about key factors to keep an eye on that could shape global dairy markets next year. But first, I'd like to quickly provide some background about the U.S. Dairy Export Council. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, we're the organization that is solely dedicated to growing the value and the volume of U.S. dairy exports. And by helping to grow overseas markets, we're providing additional outlets for your products. We were founded by U.S. dairy producers, and we are primarily funded by you through the Checkoff and Dairy Management, Inc. But we complement your funding with support from the USDA for foreign market development. As well, our third source of funding is membership dues. That's because USDEC is a membership organization. Our member base is broad, diverse, and it now totals 112 member companies and organizations. Several California processors are members of USDEC, including Dairy Farmers of America. It's our membership organization that brings together producers, processors, trading companies, and others across the industry that ensures your funding is leveraged and maximized fully, and most importantly, ensures industry collaboration and a unified effort to grow exports. These are USDEC's major programs that assist U.S. dairy exporters in building their international sales. Trade policy, important because it helps us gain greater access to overseas markets by working with U.S. negotiators to secure beneficial free trade agreements. Regulatory affairs, helping our exporters stay in the market by providing technical assistance on import regulations and requirements. Research and marketing assistance that provides tools such as information and insights on export opportunities and challenges, as well as marketing promotion support. All services that help U.S. exporters meet and compete for customer needs. Just to be clear, USDEC can't impact market conditions, nor can we sell product. But through these programs, we can help U.S. exporters understand and capitalize on opportunities and help them minimize the cost and risk of export sales. Assisting U.S. dairy exporters is USDEC's network of international offices across Asia, the Middle East, Mexico, and South America. Our representatives in these markets are important because they represent the U.S. dairy industry overseas. There are eyes and ears on the ground and in-country, and they help facilitate connections between U.S. dairy suppliers and overseas buyers, customers, and end users. Now, moving on to our export performance this year, here are the top-line numbers. Overall, U.S. dairy exporters have shipped near-record volumes at record values this year. On this slide, you'll notice sharp increases in export values. Through July, year-to-date export values hit $3.7 billion, 20% ahead of last year's. And we estimate that by the end of the year, the value of 2013 exports will total around $6.5 billion, another record and up more than 25% from the year before. Export volumes are also up. By the end of the year, we estimate the volume of U.S. products exported will total 3.8 billion pounds. On a country basis, our exports also are higher this year in all our major markets. On this slide, we show our top 10 markets in growth this year. For example, Mexico, through the first 7 months of the year, up 15%. Southeast Asia, an increase of 26% on a value basis. And in fact, we project by the end of the year, Southeast Asia will become our second billion-dollar export market, along with Mexico. And the Middle East, despite political instability in Syria and Egypt, a significant 46% increase in value. As well, we've seen increases in all major product categories. For example, non-fat dry milk skim milk powder exports were up 16% in the January through July period. They were led by hefty gains in sales to Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, as well as China and Algeria. In July alone, the U.S. exported 67% of its milk powder production. Whey is up too, and cheese exports also strong on a year-to-date basis. So here's the bottom line. In the first 7 months of the year, we exported more than 15% of our milk supply, or in more visual terms, more than 1 of every 7 tankers of milk was sold overseas. Looking at this slide, you can see what a steady and dramatic increase this has been over the last decade plus. For comparison, 10 years ago, we were exporting around 5% of our production, and most of that was government subsidized. Now we export more than 15% of our production, and it's nearly all commercial sales. Exports now represent a big percentage of our supply, and what that means is that we can't take exports lightly or as an afterthought. So what lies ahead? What are the factors to watch for in 2014? We believe there are 5 things in particular that should be on your radar and that we expect you'll be interested in and talking about next year. The biggest thing we're watching is the rebound in global milk production. You're well aware that global dairy markets are cyclical, so as conditions turn next year, it may be more challenging for U.S. exporters to defend the share they gained this year. Unlike earlier this year when a drought in New Zealand and declining production from Europe drove markets, the world right now is back in growth mode again. So far, for the start of its production season, New Zealand is off to a good start, with production expected to be up 5 to 6%. European production is back in the black as well. And as you can see from this slide, after a down year, milk production from the 5 major exporters is estimated to be up 2.3%, up 6.1 million tons in 2014 versus this year. As more supply comes on, it will apply downward pressure on international commodity prices. But even as milk production comes on, we believe that demand from China should remain strong and will underpin markets. Milk production in China is down this year, with the issue being weather, namely heat and rains. China will need to continue to import, and that's because milk production costs in China continue to remain high, meaning it still is cheaper for them to import than to produce it themselves. And this slide shows China's willingness to import dairy. In the first 8 months of the year, China's whole milk powder imports were up 28% from the prior year, and whey imports were up 20%. Also, they've been a growing importer of skim milk powder. Ongoing purchases, not only from China, as well as imports from Southeast Asia, Russia, and the Middle East, Mexico, and Japan, will keep the markets from weakening when supplies come onto the market next year. And speaking of whole milk powder, we believe another huge factor to watch in 2014 is U.S. production and exports of whole milk powder. Already this year, 2 cooperatives are bringing new whole milk powder capacity online. And in the coming months, your cooperative, Dairy Farmers of America, with your new plant in Fallon, Nevada, should be ready to fill its first bags. By next spring, the United States will have new capacity to produce more than 10,000 tons of whole milk powder per month. We believe that the United States adding whole milk powder to its product portfolio is a game changer. And why? For these reasons. For one, it shows that U.S. suppliers are becoming more responsive to the needs of global market. And to this point, it changes the way the world sees us, demonstrating we're more customer-centric and more serious about exporting. And because whole milk powder has limited use domestically, but tremendous demand overseas, an export-specific plan for this particular product underscores a significant shift in the mindset of the U.S. dairy industry. For the past few years, U.S. processors have been retooling their plants and adding capacity to manufacture new products for overseas, such as skim milk powder, Gouda cheese, milk protein concentrate, and 82% milk fat butter. But whole milk powder can be a difference maker because it can absorb a lot of U.S. milk. U.S. exporter interest in manufacturing whole milk powder stems in part from USDEC assistance that helped to identify international opportunities in this category. About 3 years ago, USDEC staff and our overseas representatives worked with buyers in Asia to cultivate relationships, to determine specifically what they need in terms of whole milk powder, and to convey our capabilities here. And we found out that most buyers in China wanted an alternative supply source. Right now, nearly all of China's imports of whole milk powder come from New Zealand, which made them nervous to rely on one supply source. Yet another thing to watch for next year has to do with the TransPacific Partnership, a free trade agreement involving 11 countries, including the U.S. With the exception of the FTAs the U.S. had signed with Korea, Panama, and Colombia a couple of years ago, our trade policy hasn't been as active as our competitors overseas. In fact, there have been a proliferation of FTAs by U.S. competitors that have hurt our export opportunities. For the United States, then, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is an important FTA. For one, it could provide us greater product access to Japan and Canada, and this would be a huge win. Canada has the most upside in terms of removing tariffs and preventing ongoing non-tariff technical barriers. It also could provide a mechanism to address ongoing technical issues. We want to ensure that there's a process and an enforceable mechanism to solve disputes on sanitary phytosanitary issues, and that decisions are science-based and transparent. And one other priority in terms of the agreement is to limit New Zealand's access to the U.S. market. That's because New Zealand is essentially a state government enterprise, and that provides them many advantages. Right now, negotiators are addressing technical issues in the agreement, but they are nearing the end game. Although the U.S. Trade Representative says he'd like for the agreement to be completed by the end of the year, it seems more likely that it'll be the first half of 2014. USDEC represents the U.S. dairy industry in these negotiations and works with U.S. government negotiators. And a final factor has to do with safety and quality issues. You're all aware of Fonterra's quality issue recently involving whey protein concentrate. And as much as we like to think otherwise, these kinds of issues will not go away. That's because we operate in a highly complex global processing and distribution system, so it's rather inevitable that these issues will remain a risk. Consumers, especially those in China, remain highly sensitive to these issues, and social media enables information and misinformation to spread very quickly. The Chekhov's Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy and a group of industry representatives recently finalized stronger and more enhanced traceability practices for processors to voluntarily adopt. The goal is that within a year to have 80% of the U.S. milk supply covered by the enhanced traceability procedures, practices that we believe will certainly protect our industry if we ever find ourselves in a food safety crisis. So in summary, 2013 has been very strong for U.S. exports, and barring any major problems, volume and value should be up significantly from last year. Looking ahead to 2014, we're cautiously optimistic because world production is back in growth mode again. But demand from China and other countries should remain strong, and that should keep our markets from weakening. U.S. capacity to make and export whole milk powder for the first time could be a game changer in terms of demonstrating U.S. commitment to meeting global customer needs. And free trade agreements, namely the Trans-Pacific Partnership, will be another area to watch, with hopes that it will provide us greater access to the Canadian market especially. And another watch-out will be concerns about safety quality issues. Before I end this presentation, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address you today. And most importantly, thank you for your generous support of USDEC and the Checkoff.